We are going to start the second part of turning up the R7s from the NMS and the NMS software. We've already gone through part one, in which we basically commissioned the nodes. We brought them into place, we set up their channels and the cards and the whole detail. And so now here at part two, we're going to get more into the functionalities that prep it for use within the NMS, prep our network for the higher functionalities of control plane. And so in order to get to that, we cannot launch control plane material from Element Manager as its starting point. So from here, we don't have any of the options for control plane. We'd have to launch it from the node itself. And so to do that, I am going to right click and then start either my CLI or my web GUI. I prefer the CLI. So launching the CLI, I'm logging into the first node at 10, which is Galactica here. My login is admin chgme.1 alpha or A. I'm in the box. Now I don't have a control plane option on the screen here, but a couple of things I'm going to need to do, because I want my topology to be visible and I want the other details to also become available. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into System Management, System General Settings, and enable control plane. Then apply it. Now that I've applied it, I OK out of there. But I want to do the same thing for all of my effective nodes here. So then I'll go to my second site and do the same thing. Now do so from all three nodes. So once again, I can draw all of my open screens here back to the screen at once here. So here are my three sessions. And so we go to each one of them. We make certain the control plane is enabled in each of our respective nodes. Now notice that once we've done that, we now have another option here available on each screen. This option was not available from the Element Manager software. Now with this option in place, we can continue on from our Element Manager. So I'll go ahead and quit out of each of these respective screens here. And so we'll go back into our node, Element Manager, wait for it to resync. Now we have our alarms and whatnot on the screen here. We right click, then we go to provisioning, and we can either create from here or go to manager. I prefer to go to manager. And because this is a ring, we're going to need to select optical lines for each degree relative to the box. So Galactica, because of the fact that our topology is in fact a ring topology, all three nodes are going to require OLs 1 and 2, or each degreed optical line connection. And so we go back into our node, we select optical line 1 and create it. We select optical line 2 and create it. Now that those are in place, we have an OL1 and an OL2. We do the same thing for each of our respective nodes. Back to Element Manager. And if we don't do it via the manager like we just did a second ago, then we'll go try it from the other means as well, which is just directly from the list. So we would right click, we go to Provisioning, Create, OL1, Next, Finish. Then we would go to Provisioning, Create, OL2, Next, Finish. From Element Manager of each of these nodes, we should see each of these present now. There are respective new optical lines created. But then we want to also make sure we do this for all of our nodes. So, because this is in fact a ring, and I'll do it the original way again, that first way. Right click, Provisioning, Create, or Manager, Optical Line 1, or OL1. You can also think of optical line as outside line because they represent physical connection that is external to the box or external to each node. So I've created the optical line for each one of these. But what I'm going to also need to do is create a corresponding PTP or physical termination point relative to those optical lines. We do need to be able to reach across from one node to the next. So I'm going to only create the DCN available entities. And why? Because I need to focus specifically on those DCN entities. So I go back to my phase 1 drawing here. And so I need to build a PTP relative to each one of these connections and relative to the optical lines in order to solidify my DCN, because what I really want to do is get my topology into Service Manager. I can build all the service managing entities later, like channel cards and DWDM channels, but at least right now I want my DCN to be established, and I want to be able to gain telemetry of my topology. I don't want to have to guess when I put it into my NM. So I go back to my node. This one is Pillar of Autumn, the third node. Pillar of Autumn's connections are from 1-2 network east to 118 and 1-2 network west to 1-1. So let's go back and do that. So I will go to Pillar of Autumn, right click, and I will select Physical Connections. It says that there's none currently built. I hit Create, and it gives me a list of available AIDs with which to build those connections. My OSFM card in that shelf is at the first, is at 1-1. I need this PTP to go to that connection, or this AID to go to that connection. So I'll build from PTP at OL1, which is technically this link right here going back to this node. Since OLs are built from the transmit direction, this blue line represents how it's attached to this box. The red simply represents how it's attached from the other box. And so, placing my focus here at Pillar of Autumn, I'll build my PTPs. So PTP1 represents OL1. So OL1, it's a two-way connection because all OLs are two-way. So PTP1, that's going to go back to the OSFM card in slot 1. It's a bidirectional, so we create it. That one's done. Now coming from the opposite direction, it's going to connect all the way back here to site 1. That's going to be at a OSFM at 118. So then I'll select that one. It should give me the only available card, if there is a card available. So PTP2 or OL2 PTP, I'm not seeing it as an option, which is a definite concern. So I'll hit refresh and see if it changes. I don't have that option. So I need to review that connection to make certain that I'll have something I can build from. And of course, likewise, I'll try to build it from the opposite direction. According to this, there's no possible connection off that other end, which is definitely not a good thing. I'll try the non-standard option. Excuse me. The option's still not available on the screen, so I need to recheck my resources. So PTP1 for OL1 is present, but need to follow up with my OSFM. The lack of that connection is a bit puzzling. Now, I closed down the screen, reopened the screen, went to physical connections again, and set to create. Select PTP2, but now I have the options that I can connect. Why they weren't present a second ago, I honestly don't know. Our results are now different. We need to select the 118 because that's how we're connected back via OL2. So 118 network, create, there's that physical connection. So now we have the OL PTPs in place. Now we need the DCN PTPs in place. So network east of my OSCM is connected to 118's client. So here's this connection, 118 client, create, network west, 11 client, create. That is our entire DCN for site 3. But now I have to repeat the process for sites 1 and 2. So to complete the processes for sites 1 and 2, I exit out of here. And I'm going to go to site 2 Enterprise. Re-review my topology here. 11 to west, 118 to east. And so we get another look. So we go back for our PTPs, physical connections, create, and then we start once again with our OLs. So first degree 1, which is OL1, going back towards site 1 from here at site 2. That will be at 11 network. Create. OL2, which goes to site 3. It's still busy. Give it a few seconds. And just like before, it's giving us a little bit of a sticky challenge here. So I'll close out of here. I'll close out of here just like I did before. I'll go back in. Now I have the options I need. This will be 118 network. Create it. And we wait for it. And then of course we go for our network east, which would be 118 client. our network west, 1 client, and there's our DCN for site 2. Then we lastly do the same thing for site 3. We wait for it. So 1-3 network, in this case, OL1, OL2, has not shown up. Refresh twice, and OL2 still has not shown up. Seems to be a sort of lag, at least in this deployment of software. So let's go back a little bit. Let's try it again from here. And there's our options. So PTP to OL2 OSFM, create it. And then we need our network east and network west connections. 118 network east, and then 1.4 for network west to 1.3. There's our DCN facilities for site 2. Now to bring everything into play, I'm going to need some more detail on my control plane options. From my provisioning here, there's not really more that I can do from this standpoint. But what I do want to do is go ahead and start setting my system date and time. And so let's go ahead and get that out of the way. And so I'm going to add a time server that we have here in our network, 172.16.8.11. And of course I want to test it. Let's see if it's available to our system. Says that it is successfully there. And so I want this one to definitely follow to that connection. So then I hit modify, and I set it to be client only so that I can get it from that server. It's going to synchronize on its own, so we'll let that sit and give it some time to do its thing. And I'll check it one last time before I go anywhere. Now, something I have noticed that the time is a little bit off. This says that it is Monday, November 5th, 2012. The actual date is in fact December 4th, 2012. So it is 1 month off in its cycling here. The condition here went away, and so now it is picking up the correct time. But let's see if it corrects it. I refreshed the screen, and it brought in the correct date and time. I'll repeat the process for all 3 nodes. add me a server in 172.16.8.11. Just like before. And in fact, before I even go that far, I'm going to change my setting to client only and let it check it on its own. It says it's not synchronized. Let's check that server. Successfully found that server. What this means is we give it a little bit of time and this is going to go away. Once it synchronizes up, we'll move on to the next node. And there it is. Waiting for it to finish loading. There are our alarms, they're present. Date and time. We go ahead and add our server in 72.16.8.11. We can test it real quick. Successful. Then we tell this one to be the client, so client only. When this synchronizes up, this error is going to go away. We'll give it some time. The point of synchronizing everything is for correlation, but the nodes also use it as a central point of reference whenever they do span equalization and any of their automated processes. There's our alignment. So now all three nodes are now in sync with the time server. Now I could go ahead and tell it topology, but I can't do it from here. I can set span equalization, but I need to have all the other details in place, channels and all the other detail. We're not quite there yet. And everything that I need here is not quite available. Our P2Ps need to be completed, and our flow connections and all that need to be in place. Right now, what we have is we have to get back into the CLI or back into the web GUI to configure the next step of control plane, but that next step will give us our topology. Unfortunately, we can't do it here in the element manager. So what I'm going to do is relaunch my CLI and log into the nodes individually. I'm going to use SSH from the NMS. So I'll go into Galactica by CLI client. chgme.1a. I go down to control plane, CP general, and I want to set this for IP, the preferred method. It says auto provisioning of lift CP. I want it to tell me those if it can see those connections. I would say yes. CPWDM. Well, let's look in the logical interfaces. It's currently empty. CPWDM, I hit create, and I look again. We'll give it that a few seconds. I'll go to Enterprise. Go to Control Plane, CP General, once again by IP address. I'm going to hit yes for lift CP, as in logical interfaces per control plane. I enable CPWDM as in control plane for WDM layer. And I'll move each of my screens to the logical interfaces screen. For all three nodes. And so now all three nodes are in the screen for logical interfaces. Now what I need to do is establish where I want my lifts to be. If we look at the topology here in the background, we can watch that as we go along. I am currently in the first site. I want to review my map. My map is showing my topology going from site 1 to site 2, that's 10 to 20, via OL2 to OL1, and then via its OL2 to that one's OL1. So then we need to follow that topology cautiously. And so in building this lift connections, first thing I'll do is I'll hit add. And so relative to logical interface for control plane for 1, what I'm looking at is the connection that goes from here back around to this final node here. So following that scheme, I have to think in terms of first site going back the backhaul to the third site. So I hit next. The facility type is going to be lift for traffic engineer but unnumbered. So lift for traffic engineering but unnumbered. The encoding is unspecified. This is a feature that the machine doesn't need to have this information specified. The DCN facility ID, however, is my source DCN for that directional path. So my network west is what flows through OL1 out of that node to the other side. So I need my OSCM cards from 1.4's network west interface. So 1.4 network west. I need to know what the IP address is of the node at the far end. Well, that one's going to be 10.19.41.30. Everything else on this page is auto-populated and can be ignored. My OL that I'm using to connect to that one is going to be OL1. So our transport layer termination point from my end, transport layer, outside line or optical line 1 or degree 1. At the opposite end, that one's touching me from its OL2. So I would say OL2 for that other connection. I apply it in. Everything is successful, meaning that the NCU acknowledges the proper AIDs are in their proper place. We do the same thing for the opposite side of the connection on that one, which would be OL2, going back towards Site 2. The details are going to be exactly the same as in logical interface for traffic engineering, but unnumbered. We go to the DCN facility AID that feeds that connection, which in this case is my network east of the same said card. The IP address of the second site is going to be 10.19.41.20. And then once again, the rest is ignored. And of course, the OL that we're touching from this direction is OL2. And the other node, the Site 2 node connection facing me, is OL1. We apply it in. There it is. Now we want to repeat the same thing for all of the other corresponding nodes. And so looking over at Site 2, we hit Add, and now we're looking at OL going back towards Site 1. Same detail, traffic engineered but unnumbered. The facility AID feeding that connection is network west. Site 1's IP address is 10.19.41.10. And then we move forward. Our connection to that one is OL1. Their connection to me is OL2. We build a final one here. This one would become Site 2 going towards Site 3. Same detail. Unnumbered. Next. Site 3's IP address is 10.19.41.30. The DCN facility AID that's feeding that one is my network east connection. We hit next. My interface touching it is OL2, and the node that's touching me is OL1. We apply it in, and we need to do that for our third site, Pillar of Autumn. We add, going back from Site 3 to Site 2. Same detail as the prior two. DCN facility AID that's feeding that connection is my network west from Site 3. The Site 2 IP address is 10.19.41.20. We hit next. Our transport layer termination point from this direction is OL1. It's touching there, OL2. We apply it in, and we do the same thing for the opposite direction. Its OL2 is going to be going back to Site 1. All the detail is exactly the same. Our feed going back in that direction is going to be network east. Site 1's IP address is 10.19.41.10. We next on through it. It's coming from our OL2, and it's going to Site 1's OL1. We apply it in, and congratulations, we've created the virtual topology for our ring. Now all we have left to do is to watch the NMS pull it in. Now if we're impatient like I am, then we can do what I call hit my friends Curly, Larry, and Mo up for the connection. And so I'll go ahead and get out of these screens here, go back to my network, and I'll go Curly, Larry, and Mo, Curly, Larry, and Mo, and Curly, Larry, and Mo. And let's see what happens. Our topology gradually begins to show itself from our network. Notice that in the NMS we did nothing different, nothing special. We're simply waiting for the polling to get back to the system. So whom I refer to as Curly, Larry, Moe are actually status polling, inventory polling, and condition checking. There's our topology. It's in place thanks to these lifts, our logical interfaces that we created, which are now being broadcast to the NM. This removes the guesswork of trying to remember or know the topology of your network. Instead, we're allowing the hardware to send that to the NM. So the network manager now has the topology without the user having to guess what the topology is. And so now this one resembles our conceptual network that we have here. The only thing remaining at this point prior to control plane and span equalization is simply building our PTPs and checking that we can see each channel's light level as it makes its pass through the network.